Listen, here's what I want you to focus on today. Because the headline sounds like trade policy, but the real story is something much bigger. Mexico's new tariffs just hit. And whether people realize it or not, this is another crack in the global supply chain system. When supply chains get political, metals get tight, and silver is the first place you see the stress show up. If you've been feeling like the official silver price doesn't match what's happening in the real world, you're not crazy. Your instincts are reading the room correctly. Right now, silver is sitting around $95 an ounce. And I'm telling you straight, a market doesn't get here in a calm, balanced environment. It gets here when demand is rising, supply is constrained, and the system is trying to pretend everything is normal. The screen can look clean, the charts can look orderly, and yet the physical pipeline underneath can be tightening. That's what we're dealing with. And Mexico's tariff shift is adding more pressure to a market that was already under stress. Let's talk about what Mexico actually did, because this is the key to the title today. Mexico put new tariffs into effect on January 1st. These aren't small, targeted adjustments. They cover a wide range of product categories, and in some cases, the tariff level goes as high as 50 across 1,463 classifications. I'm not bringing this up to debate politics. I'm bringing it up because tariffs change behavior, and behavior changes flows, and flows change availability, especially for industrial inputs. Now, people hear tariffs and they immediately think about consumer goods, shoes, appliances, cars. That's the obvious part. But the more important part is what happens behind the scenes to industrial supply chains. Companies don't just keep doing business the same way and shrug off the cost. They reroute, they renegotiate, they change sourcing, they shift processing, they stock up just in case. And all of that creates one predictable outcome: more hoarding, less spot availability, and tighter physical markets. Here's the silver connection. Silver isn't just an investment metal. It's a working metal. It's in electronics, it's in energy applications, and it's in the infrastructure of modern manufacturing. So when trade friction rises, manufacturers and intermediaries don't wait for shortages to be declared on the news. They quietly secure inventory, and when they secure inventory, those ounces don't show up for the next buyer. That's how a tightening cycle starts, without an official announcement. And here's the part that makes this story even more serious. While Mexico is hardening its trade posture, China is also tightening control around silver. China's export controls on silver are now structured around a restricted list: 44 companies approved to export in the new framework. Whether you call it strategic resource management or economic leverage, the reality is the same. When a government puts a gatekeeper in front of a commodity, it reduces flexibility and increases friction. That matters because friction is the enemy of abundance. So now you've got pressure coming from both sides. Mexico tightening trade rules that hit China-linked supply chains, and China tightening export rules around a metal that's already in deficit globally. This is not one isolated event. This is a collision of forces. And when you get forced collisions in commodities, the price is the last thing to move. The first thing to move is availability. Now let's talk about proof, because I don't want you to rely on vibes or rumors. One of the cleanest stress signals in the silver market is what's happening with deliverable supply. On the COMEX side, the registered category is the metal that's actually set up and available for delivery. In the mid-January report, registered silver was around 123 million ounces. That's the deliverable shelf, and it's not infinite. When people stand for delivery, or when demand spikes into physical channels, that registered category becomes a pressure point. This is where we have to be honest about the difference between paper and physical. Paper silver is a promise, contracts, shares, and synthetic exposure that can be created in huge volume. Physical silver is metal that has to be mined, refined, minted, shipped, and stocked. Those are real steps, real bottlenecks, real constraints. Paper can expand fast, physical cannot. And when a market is stressed, paper often stays liquid right up until the moment the physical side forces a repricing. If this is clicking for you, let me say it in plain English. You don't protect your lifetime savings with promises. You protect your lifetime savings with what you can actually own. When people say silver, they sometimes mean a ticker, symbol. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about physical silver coins and bars you can hold, or properly allocated metal stored under your control. Because when rules change, paper gets trapped inside the rules. Physical is outside the game. Now, I know some viewers hear this and think, okay, but why would tariffs in Mexico tighten silver? Here's the mechanism. Tariffs and trade barriers don't have to be on silver to affect silver. They only have to disrupt the industrial machine that depends on silver. If China's supply chains get hit with friction, China's manufacturers don't stop producing. They adapt. They protect themselves. They secure inputs. And when a major industrial base starts securing inputs in a world where the silver market is already running deficits, the squeeze intensifies. And yes, the silver market has been running deficits. The Silver Institute projected a deficit around 117 million ounces for 2025. That matters because deficits don't get fixed by optimism. Deficits get covered by inventory. And inventories, especially deliverable inventories, are exactly what tight markets chew through. This is why I keep hammering one point. The silver market is not just about price. It's about access. In calm years, you can treat silver like a normal commodity. In stress years, access becomes the story. Premiums rise, availability becomes inconsistent, delivery times stretch, and the market splits into two layers: what the screen says and what the real world demands. You've probably seen this pattern before in your life. Even if it wasn't silver, it's the same pattern we see when a system runs on confidence. Everything looks stable until the moment confidence breaks. And what breaks confidence? Political shocks, trade shocks, and rule changes. That's why this tariff story matters. It's not isolated. It's part of a broader shift where trade is being weaponized and strategic materials are being controlled. Now let me give you a historical lens that makes this even clearer. In 1971, when the US closed the gold window, we stepped into a world where currency became a promise not tied to metal. That one policy shift changed everything. It created decades where money could be expanded far faster than real resources. Over time, that gap always shows up as inflation, asset bubbles, and periodic crises. And when you add trade fragmentation on top of a promise-based monetary system, hard assets start acting differently. That's why silver is acting differently now. It's not just investors getting excited. It's the market responding to a world where governments are changing the rules and industries are trying to secure supply. And in that kind of world, silver becomes both a monetary hedge and an industrial necessity at the same time. That double role is what makes silver so explosive when the cycle turns. Now, here's something I want you to catch because it's subtle but important. The exchange itself is reacting to retail pressure. CME announced it's launching a new 100-ounce silver futures contract on February 9th, pending regulatory review, specifically pointing to record retail demand. I'm not telling you to trade futures. I'm telling you the fact the exchange is creating a new product to meet demand is a signal. It tells you participation is expanding. More eyes on silver, more activity. And in a tight physical market, more activity usually means more volatility and stronger demand into real metal. And that brings me to the part you really care about. What do you do with this information? Because you don't watch these stories for entertainment. You watch because you're trying to protect your wealth. You work too long, save too hard, and live through too many once-in-a-lifetime events to pretend this system is stable. If trade war pressure keeps building and supply chains keep fragmenting, the cost of real assets tends to rise. But not just the cost, the urgency. So here's the action. And I'm going to repeat it in a few different ways so there's no confusion. My view is simple. Secure physical silver, not promises, not exposure, physical. Coins and bars from recognized mints, and store it in a way that you control, either in your possession or in properly allocated storage, where it's not mixed into a pool of someone else's claim. Because when the paper market gets stressed, it doesn't fail politely. It changes rules. It widens spreads. It cash settles. It delays. It restructures. It does whatever it has to do to keep the system from snapping in public. And if you're sitting in paper when that happens, you're forced to accept whatever outcome the system gives you. Physical ownership flips that power dynamic. Physical ownership gives you an asset, not a claim. And yes, I know the next question. What about confiscation risk? Look, history shows governments can do extreme things when they're desperate. The US did it with gold in 1933, under Executive Order 6102. So I don't dismiss the risk. But I also look at the practical reality. Silver is deeply embedded in industry. It's not just a monetary reserve. It's part of production, that makes blanket confiscation harder to justify and harder to enforce at scale. The bigger risk, in my opinion, isn't a dramatic confiscation headline tomorrow. The bigger risk is quiet policy shifts, reporting rules, financial restrictions, and a widening gap between paper and physical that leaves average people trapped in the wrong form of ownership. That's why physical matters. Physical is the form of silver that isn't dependent on a counterparty. Physical is the form of silver that doesn't require permission to exist. Physical is the form that doesn't get diluted when more paper is created. Physical is the form that stays yours when the rulebook gets rewritten. And I want to validate you again here, because a lot of responsible savers feel like they're being punished for doing the right thing. You saved. You avoided reckless debt. You tried to play by the rules. And meanwhile, the system rewards speculation, bails out insiders, and changes policy whenever it needs to protect itself. If you've felt that, you're not imagining it. That's the environment we've been living in for years. Trade wars just accelerate it because they add real-world constraints to a system that already runs too heavily on promises. So let me land this plane clearly. Mexico's new tariffs are not just a headline. They're a signal that trade is becoming more political and less predictable. China's export controls are not just a headline. They're a signal that strategic materials are being gated and managed. And silver's behavior is not random. It's what you'd expect from a metal sitting at the crossroads of industrial necessity and monetary protection in a world that is fragmenting. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Don't confuse a paper price with real availability. Don't confuse a ticker symbol with ownership, and don't wait until everybody agrees with you before you act. The best time to secure physical silver is when you can still get it in the form you want, at terms you can live with, before the next wave of demand hits. If you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep tracking the real stress signals, tariffs, export controls, deliverable inventories, and the paper versus physical gap, so you're not blindsided by the next move. Also, drop a comment and tell me this. Do you think the trade war pressure is going to cool down this year? Or do you think we're just getting started? Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay grounded, and most importantly, secure physical metal while the window is still open.